Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today I have Rami, my aero engineer from Jager Racing, and we're going to talk a little bit about time attack, aero, and everything else in between.
Hey guys, I'm Rami. I've been with Jager Racing since 2014, I believe.
Yeah, things about there.
It's been a while. And so I've, for the most part, been here since the beginning and kind of guided the aero and engineering side of the team and kind of been able to grow with the team and also grow the engineering program as we've gone from a street class car now all the way up to unlimited. Right, so.
Yeah, just to kind of, we'll jump back a little bit. So back 2014, we were a street class car, basically utilizing the rules. They had a 5-inch splitter, standard 3D APR wing, and we were looking to go further. We were looking to go to limited. So we were looking for someone, and Rami just happened to pop up. You know, he answered that Craigslist ad.
Sloppy.
And basically, he came in and he joined our program and really stepped us up that extra notch. So we were really going after it in just a, standard, sensible way that most people go about time attack and aero. Looking at past products that people have made and looking at their results and basically expecting that to work for me just like it did for them. Which, if anybody knows anything about a little bit of aero, that's not quite how it works. Every car is different. You might have a bug eye STI, and if you're trying to use the same aero from a Hawkeye STI, yes, they're similar, but they're not the same. So there's little tweaks that you have to make to get those integrated. Now, on a car, in time attack, can you get away with a lot of that stuff?
Depends on the class, I think, that you run.
Yeah.
So what I would say is, like, if you look at your general time attack car, it's a bunch of just like, okay, this works for XYZ team, I'm going to put on my car, and it's going to work just as well. And the hard part of that is that, like, if you don't have a way of measuring how much downforce and drag you're making, you actually don't know what your aero performance is. And then people will say, well, what about the lap? The lap time. And yeah, to a certain extent that can work, but if you're doing very subtle changes, like, your change in lap time could also be due down to driver style, right?
Yeah.
So how do you kind of figure that out? And like that's where I kind of came in, and like we've been trying to like build up like, okay, how do we actually measure stuff? I guess, and that's where I think we started with AEM, right?
Absolutely. That was a big part, like you're saying, is we went from a standard off-the-shelf setup that you can just buy for any Subaru out there, Cobb's off the Cobb access port, and then we went that one step further, and we went and got the AEM AQ1, which is a hugely powerful tool, and it's relatively cheap, actually.
Yeah. So I think when we were looking at it, it was like $500,
yeah.
And for what you get and what it can give you, it's amazing. It's like 8 analog channels. And plus a couple more digital channels, and we've used all our analog channels to actually, what we do is we do it kind of simply, but like we measure kind of the change in ride height on the car essentially through our AQ1, and doing a little bit of math wizardry, like we can kind of figure out actually how much downforce the car is making. And then through some other techniques, kind of using like the lap time predictions on the AEM and the timing features on it, we can actually figure out drag too, if we do like careful testing, which, when the car runs, we could do that. But like, that's another story for another day. But yeah, like I think that was like one of the big things that we focused on in 14 when I came in. I think that was one of the first things I told them. I said, if we're going to do this right, and we have aspirations to move from a street class car where, you can probably get away with like kind of guessing on the aero to an unlimited car where that's not a very smart approach at all, you really have to have data, and data has to drive your decisions. And that's, if I'm going to give advice, or I'm assuming that's what this is about, like that's the first thing you should always look at is like, how can I get more information about my car? And that, for us, that was the AQ1.
Yeah.
And that's how it started, at least.
Yeah, I mean, that was a huge start to our program in terms of actually gathering data. And that's what drove us to go to the Infinity after all of that. So all of our data then synced. We were able to use more data from the Infinity, and now we have the digital dash as well. which, to be honest, we're still learning how to use for the most part. I mean, we have to have the car running so we can learn how to use these things. So as we get there, we'll have more experience and more time. One of the reasons why I have an AQ1 actually in my Miata is it keeps me up to date on all the data formats and how to evaluate it. So I'm able to look at that. And in a Miata, it's so slight because you're talking about, over 100-yard span, I might only gain 100 or 1 mile per hour at a time. So, you really have to be able to get really in tight to that. So, but yeah, so we went through and we talked about how we went from no data analysis, just guesswork, to how we're going to a very data-driven approach now. And even as we speak, we're trying to get this car running and we're trying to go the extra mile. But now we're going even further, and things like our new Aero development, that's all in the works, all at the same time. So even though, it might look from the outside like, man, these guys aren't doing very much, there's a lot going on behind the scenes. So there's a lot to do. But going forward, Rami can tell you, I mean, we're definitely seeing a lot of growth in the sport in terms of aerodynamics and different people and what their approaches are. It's very interesting because, like anything else, most people go off the premise of, if it worked on that car, it should work on my car.
Yeah.
And that's a very dangerous approach to take. And just in general, people don't realize the aerodynamic forces. You might attach a splitter to your car, and how you attach that splitter,
it matters.
It really matters. So be really careful in doing so. And people, I've seen some really sketchy designs where you're going, how the hell is this going to even stay on this car for more than a lap? Yeah. So, I mean, and even things we're learning all the time. One of the things that we learned at Superlab 2018, we went off the course very slowly, and just barely rubbed the splitter on, and a lot of the mount bent. And to be honest, our mount also holds our radiator. So we're really evaluating that now and looking back and saying, is that really what we want? Because if something happens and that splitter digs in, we're not worried about the stupid, like, oh, our car's going to flip over BS, as I've heard some people say. But we're more worried about it hitting and ripping the radiator out of the car. So you go from, it's going to be a little Aero fix, pound it out here and there and fix something there, to now you could lose your radiator and other things bad that can happen. So we're really trying to figure out what we want to do there. But so as we were talking about with our data and how we're utilizing that data to incorporate that within our design and all these other things, Rami's also going to explain a little bit how we go from that top down and how that all works.
Our engineering side of Jager Racing is actually structured off of how a professional race team would do it. From the Aero side, I guess.
Because we are professional.
Yeah. Okay. So in a professional team, if you actually look at, say, a Formula 1 team or a Le Mans team or even like a touring car team, on the Aero side, they actually have three major categories of development. So you have your initial type of simulation type stuff like CFD, you have your wind tunnel testing, and then you have your trackside testing. For us, like when we started, we didn't have the facilities to do CFD type work. Wind tunnel stuff we hadn't really had yet at all. So we started with the trackside, which is what I would recommend for most starting teams, and that's where the AQ1 came in. And so the first thing you look at is, okay, how do I measure how much my car is moving up and down? And then based off of that, you can take your spring rates and kind of guess how much downforce you're making if you do your testing right. I'm not going to tell how to do that, but you can figure it out. And you can use like some sort of acceleration, deceleration, kind of figure out how the drag comes out. So from there, you can take that information, and that kind of gives you an idea of like, okay, if I start with a baseline idea, like just fully stock car, like what are my baseline values? And then I can add something to it, like just one thing, change one thing, and then do the test and say, okay, did I go up or did I go down in downforce and drag?
Well, and that's a very, very particular and important point. Too many people go out and make 3, 4, 5 changes at a time and expect, and the expectation is, well, if I make more changes, the better it's going to be. The reality is that we have to take these small changes incrementally to really be able to dive into the data and look. I mean, drivers all the time, I hear this BS. Oh yeah, if I do a couple clicks on my damper, I can feel it. I know exactly what it is, and so on and so forth, and these little tweaks here and there, and I can feel all this stuff. You know, so many times you can play a joke on somebody, and I've literally walked up and changed the dampening setting from whatever it was to complete soft on just the front end of a car, and the guy came back and had no idea.
Wow, what a dick move.
But that's the whole point, though. People think, oh yeah, I clicked it, click, so now you're like, okay, yeah, I felt a difference. But then if I walk up and say I'm going to do something, or don't say I'm going to do something, and make a whole bunch of adjustment change, and you come back and say I didn't feel any change, what does that really tell you? I mean, all of our butt dynos we think are super calibrated, but at the end of the day, it's really not. It's definitely something that I think that we overemphasize, that we think we know. I know, for instance, if you take 50 horsepower out of my car, I really don't feel the difference. 50 horsepower in an 800 horsepower car, you're not talking huge. Yeah. But I will say this.
It won't blow a head gasket.
Yeah. But I can say this. If I take 10 horsepower out of my Miata, I can definitely feel a difference. Because you're talking about 10% of the power out of the car. So, you have to approach that in percentages and so on and so forth. But I definitely think that approach needs to be attached to all of this and say, do very small, incremental choices, and then evaluate from there.
And the thing is that, like, and even when we started, I think in 2014, there's this kind of assumption that engineering and using data means expensive, which is really frustrating for, someone like me from the data and engineering side, because no, it does not. Actually, if you spend the time to do things correctly, you actually end up saving a lot of money, because you're not making bad decisions where you have to redesign because you don't know what's wrong. Like, to give you an idea, the 2014 and 2015 Aero setup of Mark's car was done using an Excel spreadsheet, calculations done on paper, and I think one or two pressure gauges that I found often industrial site, very, very cheap, and it looks kind of ghetto rigged, but really I think we spent less than $200 on data equipment, but what we got out of it was huge. Yeah. And obviously as you grow, you increase your data capabilities and the expense goes up, sure, but proportionally, if we were just blind guessing, I can't even imagine designing an unlimited class car just guessing, putting, I'm gonna make a huge diffuser and a huge splitter, and I'm gonna go out, I'm gonna get you 3 seconds off your lap time, guaranteed. Really?
Well, if you make it really, really big, I'm sure it'll do something, right?
So really, do you know that? And then what I say is okay, well, so maybe you have an improvement. Do you know what your distribution of your forces are on your front and rear tires? How do you tune for that? Does the driver actually like it? Can the driver feel it? Those are all these questions where it goes back to data. Data can give you that answer. And, sometimes data isn't clear, but it's a lot better having an educated guess than just I hope this works, And that's, I guess, for any team, even starting from the street class, or maybe even enthusiast class, that's what I would recommend is put a data logger on your car and try and figure out a way to measure your aero forces, and start from there. If you're serious about developing your aero,
absolutely,
kit. Obviously, if you're just there to have fun, do whatever. But
yeah. But as Time Attack seems to be growing exponentially in the U.S. market, and these people are constantly looking for that slight little edge. To give you an idea, granted, yes, this is a little thinking above probably, but when we came into it from 14 to 15, one of the things we were looking at is a hood that would vent appropriately and do what we wanted it to do. So we worked with Singular Motorsports to create a hood that has vents in the appropriate places, and that's why all of you guys with Subarus and the Hawkeye and Bug-Eye and all those developments have a hood now, or at least louvers that you can add to your hood that will vent appropriately in a good way. And so we were able to create something that is able to help the end user market through just simple testing.
And that's something that CFD is great, but back then we didn't really have the ability to do CFD. So we actually did all of that using that pressure gauge that I was talking about. Mm-hmm. We actually physically measured pressures at different speeds at different areas on the hood, and just saw, okay, this is what's happening with the data, and based off of that, we said, okay, we should put our vents here. And that's something small that you can do. Yes, it takes time, but now you know, oh, my heat or my air extraction out of the hood should work.
Yeah.
Like, rather than just like, oh, you know, this guy on YouTube did it like this, and I'm gonna do it like this, and I don't know if it works, but it worked for him, so great. You know, it's like, I mean,
because being really realistic, a lot of the carbon fiber hoods and stuff like that have been put out in the market already. A lot of it was aesthetics. It's this looks good, so let's put it here. The market will like this because it looks good. It's not done out of CFD design or actual testing. It's just this looks good, let's do it. And I get that. Those hoods aren't for guys that are trying to do this, but I mean that's just one example of some of the things, you know, that we've kind of worked with different companies on. But I think that's the kind of stuff that's really important, where you guys have to understand that it's time, effort, again, like from the other video, time, effort, dedication, all this comes in. I mean, one thing that people tend to shy away from is that it's, oh, that'll take too long, and that's what the data comes in too, because generally the thought is it's going to take too long to evaluate that, it's going to take too long to do this, it's going to take too long to get all this together,
well,
it's going to cost too much.
How long and how much does it cost to build an aero kit, figure out it doesn't work, and then redo it?
Yeah,
a long time. And then now you start like you know, maybe in street class, like a splitter is like aluminite, like wood, simple diffuser, but then you go to limited class, like, oh, now we're building tooling to build a splitter and a diffuser. Oh, how many times do I want to redo that? Not more than once, hopefully. So like, and that's the thing where the challenge, at least for me when I came in, was like, okay, how do we go from a street class development to an unlimited class development, which is, there's a lot of work behind the scenes, like on the engineering side, to make this car work, right? So like, and so like, first obviously it's the trackside data, but now we've been working with Varus Engineering on the CFD side, so the simulation side, and that's helped us even more. So now we have more knowledge with just what we were able to get on the track side. Now with the CFD side, we can look at even in more detail of what we can do with the car. And then eventually, like, we're working with a local university to try and build wind tunnel stuff, which will be the next step. I mean,
absolutely. And you always have to keep looking for that. You have to keep continually trying to get to the next level. I mean, obviously, we've had some great successes throughout the years, which are amazing. But just like anything else, if you're not continually trying to improve, then you're always going to stay stagnant, and then people are going to surpass you. One of the cars that I always looked at, obviously, is you look way, way, way back. You go to like look at the Sierra Evo, and you actually look at that car, and you're looking at, man, this car is pretty simple as a whole. But I don't know, when I look at it from the outside, I think pretty simple from a whole. And then you start looking at the team. You start understanding where they came from, and I think one of the things that most people don't understand is the under tray portion of it, and how that was built and how important that was in that design, because of the Formula Atlantic that they came from. I think that's something that people looked at and they went, it's kind of simple, and then you look at it even today and you're like, yeah, it's kind of simple. And now, don't get me wrong, as we've talked about before, evolution of technology, right? So technology has vastly changed since those days. I mean, that was fucking 2000.
Yeah, I think I was still in college when that car was still like
5. Like, it was a long time ago. And those things, we've far surpassed that as a whole. And you know, scary enough to think if those guys were to come out again and build another car like that, and with the technology where it is now, in comparison, you might see a really gnarly car. But I mean, we see stuff like that come out of Life Motorsports with a very sophisticated tunnel and sophisticated design on the under tray, so on and so forth. And I think that's something that we're going to see more and more of. But the wings themselves have gone from, you know, we look at Sierra, single element 3D wing, right?
Yeah,
now we went dual.
Yeah.
A good case that I can think of off the top of my head, of a friend of ours. They had built this Time Attack Evo, and they brought it out to Superlab, and I don't think they had very much time to do testing or anything of that nature. And what ended up happening was they ended up in a situation where they had to turn their wing all the way up, and they were basically, nothing against them, but basically it was obvious that they didn't ever end up doing any testing and any CFD to understand the balance of the car. So that was something that came into play really quickly and made that car very undrivable for the driver. And so he really struggled with it and was really never able to put down a really good lap. But I mean, that's where data really comes into play, and so on and so forth.
And it's also, I guess, this is, I think, something you brought up earlier was like long-term thinking. So, like, say you're starting off like we did in street class, right? Like, one thing you should be thinking of, and this is one thing that we actually had discussed, is like, okay, 5 years from now, where do I want to be?
Yeah.
And for us, it was like 5 years from now, we want to be in limited class. We're in unlimited, so a little bit further ahead. But like, so we said, okay, if we're going to be in limited class 5 years from now, what steps do we have to do in between on the engineering side to build our program? And that's really, if you're a car owner or if you're a crew member on a time attack team, that's one thing you have to constantly be thinking about. Like, yes, you need to think about the day-to-day. That's very important. But you also have to have a vision for where do I want to be in 5 years and how do I get there? And how do I get there with what we have? Because, like, our team, like, we do a pretty good job with what we have. Like, I think I was joking with you earlier. I was saying we kind of feel like we're like the Racing Point or the Force India of the time attack world, because we actually don't have a huge paycheck that, like, we just dump into the car. We actually strive to do what we can with what we have.
Absolutely.
Like, and we try to make every like dollar count as far as we can go. And a lot of that has to do with like future planning. Like, I want to get here, how do I get here? And sometimes it comes down to like, you know, I want to do, say for example, like wind tunnel testing. Like, this is one idea that I had earlier on, where it's like, well, I want to do that, but I can't afford to take my car to wind shear and pay like $2,000 an hour to run the car. So like, what's one idea that we can think of? And there were multiple ideas. Like, one was like working with a school, which is what we're kind of doing right now. But another idea, and I haven't like really had time to write down and kind of put this idea out, but I'm going to throw it out there right now, is like, what is a wind tunnel? A wind tunnel is just a duct that you use to kind of control and make a nice smooth airflow. So what stops you from making a properly designed duct and putting it on top of your car, putting a model inside and just driving at 60 miles an hour or whatever and having a nice uniform flow and measuring your forces? Like, that's something that you can do, and that is a wind tunnel, technically. I mean, really, it's simple, and that's one thing I consider with Mark's team, like with this team. Like, I mean, but that's the thing, like, sometimes, like, you can't just get stuck in this idea of like, well, I'm just a small team, I can't afford to do what they do in F1. Well, do you need F1 type precision? No, you just need a number, an idea. So can you make something simplified? Like, take the same concept and bring it down into like an affordable way of doing things. So
absolutely,
I think like that's one thing I really love about this team, is like that challenge of like being able to like, okay, I want to do this, but I don't have the funds to do it. So how do I do it in a way that I can still get useful data from, but, you know, with using what you have?
Yeah, and Rami hit the nail on the head there. I mean, it's a situation where if money is no object and we had hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend every year on the car, we would do as such, and obviously build the best time attack car we can. In our situation, we don't have 1% of that realistically. So you're talking about a situation where we're taking the very smallest of small budgets and making it stretch and stretch and stretch. You got to remember too, in 2015, when we went to limited, we were planning on staying there for years.
Yeah.
That was the initial plan. The only reason why that got anywhere changed is because Global Time Attack changed rules.
Yeah.
When they changed the rules in 2015 to 2016 and said, yeah, no more under tray bodies, or under trays, and
I think the big one was no under trays, because we had just designed a full under tray.
Oh yeah, because there was no under trays and no more hand cooks. So no more hand cooks and no more under trays. And it was kind of one of those things, we just got done with the development of the under tray. The under tray was a huge implementation to our entire pack. Like, that was our baseline, essentially. Yeah. So if we take that off, we have to start all over. So at that point, we made the decision, we're just going to go unlimited. So you have to understand, we went all of 15, we only went out for one event.
Yeah.
Or no, sorry, I take that back. We went out 2 events, because we did Big Willow as well.
That's right.
So we went out 2 events in 2015, broke a record at Big, and then went out at Superlap and got 3rd place at Superlap in 2015. Yeah. And then the next year, it went from limited to now you got to ramp up again and do unlimited, which means we had to pull more stuff out of the car. We were able to do even more things to the car, but at the same time, we weren't ready. Yeah. Financially, team, we were ready to sit in limited for a couple of years, build the car up, build data sets, and it completely changed. So that's one of those things that happened to us in terms of rule changes within Time Attack that really, I'd say it really hindered our ability as a team to develop as we wanted to, and it really pushed us. Now, I'm not going to complain too much. 2016, we went out and we won overall at Buttonwillow for Super Lap Battle. So, I mean, it didn't work out like too bad. I'm not sitting over here crying about it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we both know the car can be so much better than that. The car has the capability. I mean, right now we're sitting with Will Young with a 137?
Yeah, 137 something.
At Buttonwillow, and he's also been going hard charging throughout the field everywhere and breaking records everywhere. And obviously, we understand GST, they're back in the shop. They're working hard. Life Motorsports, they just got their car back together.
Yeah.
They got some things figured out. They're hard charging. People like UMS Tuning, Tony Zerka, what do you think he's been doing for the last year and a half, 2 years, or whatever? It's hard though, because all of us are still working under the same premise. Like, people think, oh, every one of these cars is $1 million car. Yeah. If you told someone to go build this car, it's going to cost you a gangload of money.
Yeah.
But these are all cars that people basically slap together in their shops and work their ass off building. And that's something that, you can't really put a price tag on. I mean, it's not easy. And so when these rules change, or when people just decide to go up a class or down a class or whatever they might do, I mean, it's huge. I mean, one of the reasons, in my belief, JC Monet actually has stayed in limited for years and years and years. And one of the things that he had to adhere to coming back to limited was no more under tray. So he had to pull his under tray off and, rework his car in that manner. And it is a testament. JC's smart, in a sense, to stay in limited, because it doesn't take a genius to look at the unlimited class cars and look at the budget that it's going to take to run those.
And I think that's where it's just mind-boggling how just the jump from limited to unlimited, how much extra work it takes to kind of make it happen. I think even from an engineering side, like,
oh, that's, I think, the biggest.
God, like, it's just like the amount of work it takes. I can't even, like what you see at the track is like maybe 10% of everything. Like, to give you an idea, to make our Aero kit, right, that meant initially, like the new diffuser, we had to have a tool designed. Well, before the tool was designed, we had to actually design the part, have it evaluated, then figure out, okay, well, this is the shape we want. How do we make a tool in order to do that? So then we had to, luckily at that time, Jeremy was on our team site into how you design a tool, because he essentially designed that tool for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we had to actually go and have it made. And then you have the tool, so now we have this tool, now we have to have a carbon guy who knows what they're doing actually lay it up. And this entire process takes, like, I think we started the new diffuser design in May, I think.
Yeah.
And, like, we were rushing as hard as we could, and we had the initial part delivered the day before Super Lap Battle.
Midnight Super Lap of Super Lap.
And it didn't fit.
It didn't fit.
So that gives you an idea of, like, and that's just one component.
Yeah.
So that gives you an idea of, like, how much work it takes just to, and that's just one component design. That's not considering developing all the data systems on the car. That's not considering future planning work. And so, I mean, yeah, there's a lot that goes on. And yeah, again, like, if we were probably a street class car, we probably wouldn't need to do all that work.
No. And don't get me wrong, a street class has been going on. Yeah. I mean, we were in street class for 2 years, and for 2 years we basically broke every record at every track. Marcos Malonis came on. He came in the year after we left, and he, I think, almost, if not every record at every track that GTA actually went to. And so he's now taken over all those those records. So as it goes on, there's going to be another guy. Johnny Hernandez is coming on strong in street class now. There's going to be another guy. There's always going to be. Records are made to be broken. These guys that get all weird about their records and like all that crap. Like, I could care less. You know what? Breaking a record is great, because you can always say you broke a record. It doesn't go away. Saying you broke a record doesn't go away. Holding the record does go away. Mike from GST had this really awesome line, though, which I found it very interesting. Because if you actually look at Time Attack as a whole, right? Time Attack is all about breaking records. That's what we care about. Breaking records. That's what we care about. But interestingly enough, so you break a record, the next year another guy breaks your record. Or hell, a couple months later, guy breaks your record, name's now wiped off the books, essentially. Mike said something interesting, which I never thought I'd hear Mike say, which was that winning an event, I heard him say this, so he can't deny it. Winning an event is actually something that's more, what's the word I'm looking for? Winning an event is actually something that holds truer longer because it's forever in the books. Alright guys, that's a wrap. I hope you like, subscribe, and be ready for more Time Attack videos. Thank you to Rami for coming and hanging out and have a chat with us. Hope you guys like it. If you do, talk to us down below. Give us some more impressions and more things to talk about. Alright guys, have a good one.